After dedicating 30 years to building Evergreen Gardens from an abandoned lot into the most sought-after wedding venue in Oakridge County, I never imagined my own daughter, Madeline, would exclude me from her wedding day. I had single-handedly raised her after her father abandoned us when she was only 4. But once she met her fiancé's aristocratic family, I suddenly became an embarrassment. My calloused hands and practical wisdom no longer gifts but liabilities. What my daughter didn't realize was that the exclusive Rosewood Manor where she desperately wanted to exchange her vows had been my most closely guarded acquisition just 3 years earlier, a secret I'd kept even from my closest family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I can still feel the sting of that Wednesday afternoon when the elegant cream envelopes arrived at every household in our extended family except mine. That same evening, I received a call from Blake, Madeline's fiancé, inquiring about booking Rosewood Manor for their June wedding. The irony was almost unbearable. He had no idea he was speaking to the mother who apparently wasn't refined enough to witness her only daughter's vows. The journey that led me to this moment began on the edges of Oakridge County, in a small rental with a leaky roof and a view of the interstate. I was 23, newly abandoned with a 4-year-old daughter, and exactly $340 to my name. Richard, my college sweetheart and Madeline's father, had left us for his executive assistant and a new life in Europe. The divorce papers arrived, with a check that barely covered 2 months' rent and a note that read simply, "I wasn't meant for fatherhood. Don't try to contact me." Those early years blur together in my memory, a kaleidoscope of double shifts at the local diner, night classes in business administration, and precious hours with Madeline, teaching her to read by lamplight when the electricity was temporarily shut off. What remained constant was my determination that she would never feel the absence of opportunity, even if she felt the absence of her father. "Why doesn't Daddy ever call?" she would ask, her small fingers tracing the outline of the single photograph I had kept. "Some people aren't strong enough to be parents," I would tell her, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to spill over, "but I'm strong enough for both of us." My unexpected entry into the world of event venues began as a desperate measure rather than a planned career. When the owner of Evergreen Gardens, then just a run-down reception hall with a neglected acre of land behind it, offered me a job managing weekend bookings, I accepted immediately. The pay was marginally better than the diner, and the hours meant I could be home when Madeline returned from school. Within 6 months, I was practically running the place. Mr. Jenkins, the elderly owner, had lost his passion for the business after his wife's passing. He would arrive late, leave early, and spend the intervening hours in his cluttered office with the door firmly closed. Meanwhile, I was developing relationships with local vendors, creating detailed planning systems, and staying late to clean bathrooms when the maintenance staff failed to show. "You know, Vivian," Mr. Jenkins said one evening, finding me replanting the flower bed near the entrance, "you care more about this place than I do." I looked up, dirt smudged across my cheek, my hands encased in gardening gloves Madeline had given me for my birthday. "Someone has to," I replied, not unkindly. 2 weeks later, he called me into his office and made an offer that would change the trajectory of my life. "I'm selling the place," he said, shuffling through papers that hadn't seen proper filing in years. "Developers want to tear it down, build some condominiums. Good money, but—" He trailed off, gazing out the window at the massive oak tree that dominated the property's back corner. "But what?" I prompted, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. I couldn't afford to lose this job. "Margaret and I got married under that tree," he said softly, 47 years ago. He turned back to me with surprising clarity in his roomy eyes. "I'll sell it to you instead, for half what they're offering." I laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. "Mr. Jenkins, I can barely afford my rent." He shrugged. the gesture somehow both dismissive and understanding. "I've seen how you handle money, Vivian, how you squeeze value from nothing. The bank will give you a loan with the property as collateral. I'll take payments over 10 years. He slid a handwritten contract across the desk. Think about it. I didn't sleep that night, instead covering my kitchen table with calculations, projections, and what-ifs. The risk was enormous, potentially catastrophic. But something about the way sunlight filtered through that old oak tree, the way the land seemed to hold possibility in every neglected corner, had worked its way under my skin. The next morning, I signed the contract with hands that trembled only slightly. Madeline watched me with solemn eyes, understanding even at 9 years old that something momentous had occurred. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" she asked as we walked home, her small hand nestled in mine. I squeezed her fingers gently. "We're going to build something beautiful, baby. Something that will be ours forever." Those first years of ownership nearly broke me. I worked 18-hour days, learned plumbing and basic electrical work from library books, and slept on a cot in the venue's back office to save on rent. Madeline spent her after-school hours doing homework at a folding table in the corner, occasionally helping me fold linens or arrange simple centerpieces. Slowly, painstakingly, Evergreen Gardens began to transform. I converted the neglected acre into gardens that bloomed in carefully orchestrated succession, ensuring flowers from early spring through late fall. I renovated the main hall, exposing original wooden beams and replacing fluorescent lighting with vintage chandeliers found at estate sales. When couples began requesting outdoor ceremonies beneath the ancient oak, I built a simple arbor that framed the massive trunk without detracting from its natural grandeur. Word spread, bookings increased, and gradually, our financial situation stabilized. We moved from our cramped rental to a modest house just 10 minutes from the venue. Madeline entered middle school with new clothes and the confidence that comes from security. I hired staff, real staff, not just temporary help, and began paying myself a proper salary. Through it all, Madeline remained my constant, my purpose, my joy. She watched me negotiate with vendors and soon began doing it herself, securing better deals than I could with her earnest, freckled face and precocious business sense. She learned to arrange flowers, to calm nervous brides, to troubleshoot sound systems that mysteriously failed moments before ceremonies. "We make a good team, don't we, Mom?" she would say, her adolescent pride evident as she presented me with the schedule she had created for an upcoming event. "The best," I would affirm, marveling at this remarkable person I was raising. Intelligent, compassionate, and utterly unafraid of hard work. By the time Madeline left for college, a moment that filled me with equal parts pride and desolation, Evergreen Gardens had become one of the most sought-after venues in the county. I had expanded the property twice, adding a dedicated ceremony space and a charming cottage where bridal parties could prepare in comfort. We employed 15 people full-time, and dozens more on a seasonal basis. The business that had begun as a desperate gamble had become a thriving enterprise. During Madeline's undergraduate years, she drifted gradually away from the venue, focusing on her studies in international relations and spending summers interning at prestigious firms rather than arranging flowers at Evergreen. I supported this independence wholeheartedly, even as I missed our partnership. She was building her own path, just as I had taught her. It was during her final semester that Madeline met Blake Harrington at a charity gala in the city. The son of a former ambassador and heir to a banking fortune, Blake possessed the kind of pedigree that opened doors Madeline had never even known existed. When she brought him home during spring break, I watched her transform in his presence, her gestures more restrained, her laugh more measured, her stories carefully curated to emphasize her accomplishments while minimizing her humble beginnings. "Blake's family has a summer home in the Hamptons," she told me excitedly after he had returned to the city. "And a chalet in Switzerland. Can you imagine, Mom? Switzerland. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I smiled, genuinely happy for her excitement while nursing a small discomfort. I couldn't quite name. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. But you seem different around him. Less yourself. Her expression cooled slightly. I'm growing up, Mom, evolving. Blake moves in circles that matter. Global finance, international diplomacy. His family knows people who can help with my career. Of course, I said, backing away from the criticism she clearly heard in my observation. I'm just glad you're happy. As Madeline's relationship with Blake deepened, her visits to Evergreen and to me grew increasingly infrequent. When she did come home, our conversations felt stilted, measured, as though we were both carefully avoiding certain topics. She no longer offered suggestions for the business or reminisced about the events we had managed together. Instead, she spoke of gallery openings, political fundraisers, and the influential people Blake had introduced her to. Meanwhile, I continued expanding my business ventures, although I now kept them largely to myself during our brief interactions. 3 years ago, when Rosewood Manor, a historic estate that had long been the crown jewel of Oakridge County, came on the market, I moved decisively to acquire it. The purchase was complex, involving multiple investors and a holding company that effectively obscured my ownership from public knowledge. This wasn't deliberately secretive. It was simply good business practice for a high-profile acquisition that might otherwise affect vendor relationships with my existing venues. Rosewood Manor represented everything Evergreen Gardens was not: old money, aristocratic lineage, and impeccable historical pedigree. While Evergreen welcomed couples with modest budgets and DIY decorations, Rosewood catered exclusively to the elite, with a price tag that made even seasoned wedding planners blanch. I had never mentioned the acquisition to Madeline, not out of secrecy, but because our conversations rarely touched on my business anymore. The engagement announcement came via text message, a photograph of Madeline's hand bearing a diamond that probably cost more than my first year's mortgage payments, on Evergreen. I called immediately, eager to hear her voice and share in her happiness, but the conversation felt oddly formal, as though she were speaking to a casual acquaintance rather than the mother who had raised her. We're thinking June, she said when I asked about their plans. Blake's mother has connections at Rosewood Manor. It's normally booked years in advance, but she thinks she can arrange something. That's quite a venue, I replied carefully, my stomach tightening at the irony. She couldn't possibly understand. I'd be happy to help with the planning. You know, weddings are my specialty. The silence that followed lasted just a beat too long. Oh, that's sweet, Mom, but Blake's mother has already engaged Celeste Morrison. She named one of the most exclusive wedding planners in the country, a woman known for her celebrity clients and six-figure fees. This needs to be, well, a certain caliber of event. Blake's father was knighted by the Queen, you know. Half the guests will be flying in from Europe. I swallowed the hurt her words inflicted, focusing instead on her happiness. Of course, honey. Whatever you want. Just let me know how I can help. In the months that followed, information about the wedding came in carefully measured doses. Text, messages about dress fittings I wasn't invited to attend, brief calls about guest lists I hadn't helped create. I tried to remain supportive, to suppress the growing fear that I was being systematically excluded from one of the most important days of my daughter's life. Then came the Sunday dinner at my small house, a rare visit from Madeline and an even rarer appearance by Blake, who normally begged off such intimate gatherings with vague references to work commitments. They arrived bearing expensive wine and news that the Rosewood Manor booking had fallen through. Some issue with the management company, Blake said dismissively, swirling his Bordeaux with practiced elegance. Apparently they're under new ownership and revising their booking policies. I maintained my composure with effort, focusing on cutting the roast I had spent hours preparing. That must be disappointing, I offered. What will you do now? Madeline sighed dramatically. Blake's mother is making some calls. She knows absolutely everyone. I'm sure she'll sort it out. She glanced around my modest dining room with poorly concealed assessment. The wedding is going to be featured in Modern Bride, you know. Everything has to be absolutely perfect. Later, as I cleared the dishes, a task neither of them offered to help with, I overheard their conversation in the odd living room. Your mother seems nice, Blake said, his tone suggesting he had searched for a more palatable adjective and failed to find one. She is nice, Madeline replied defensively before adding in a lower voice. Just not really. Our world, you know. She's always been very... She paused, and I could picture her gesturing vaguely, searching for the right word. Practical, limited in her outlook. What about the wedding? Blake asked. Is she expecting some kind of role? My hands, stilled on the plates I was stacking, my breath caught in my throat as I waited for my daughter's response. God, no, Madeline laughed, the sound brittle and unfamiliar. Can you imagine? Mom in her sensible shoes giving opinions on the canapés to your mother's friends from the diplomatic corps? It would be mortifying. I set the dishes down carefully, pressing my palms against the cool countertop to steady myself. The pain of her words was physical, a constriction in my chest that made breathing difficult. This was my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful daughter who had once helped me unclog toilets at Evergreen when the plumber couldn't come until morning, who had held my hand at night when money was tight and fear threatened to overwhelm me, who had promised, tears streaming down her face at high school graduation, that no matter where life took her, we would always be a team. Now I was an embarrassment to be managed, a complication to be minimized. When the invitation to Blake and Madeline's engagement party arrived the following week, addressed only to Ms. Vivian Parker and guest, I recognized it for what it was, a consolation prize. The real celebration, the wedding itself, would proceed without me. The suspicion was confirmed when Eleanor, my late cousin's widow and my closest friend, called in confusion. Vivian, the strangest thing happened today, she said without preamble. I received a wedding invitation from Madeline for the ceremony and reception at Rosewood Manor in June. But she mentioned you were planning a separate, more intimate celebration for family friends later in the summer. She said you preferred it that way. The lie landed like a physical blow. I thanked Eleanor calmly, assured her there must be some misunderstanding, and promised to sort it out. Then I sat in my darkened kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life dedicated to creating other people's perfect days, and allowed myself, finally, to weep. The next morning, my phone rang just after 7. I answered automatically, expecting one of my venue managers with a question about the day's events. Instead, I heard the cultured tones of Rosewood Manor's managing director, a woman I had hired personally, but who had no idea I was the principal, owner of the holding company that signed her paychecks. Ms. Parker, I have a rather delicate situation, she began, her British accent more pronounced under stress. A Mr. Blake Harrington has been quite insistent about securing Rosewood for a wedding in June. He claims his mother is acquainted with several of our investors and seems to believe this should guarantee him special consideration, despite our fully booked calendar. I closed my eyes, a plan forming with crystal clarity. And what have you told Mr. Harrington? That ownership has implemented new policies requiring personal approval for any calendar adjustments. He's requesting a meeting with the owner to plead his case directly. She paused, clearly uncomfortable. I've attempted to explain that our ownership structure is complex and that such meetings are highly unusual, but he was most persistent. I considered my options carefully, weighing 30 years of maternal devotion against the sharp, recent pain of rejection. Tell Mr. Harrington that the principal owner will make an exception in this case, I said finally, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. Set up a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Are you certain, Miss Parker? I can continue to decline if you prefer. I'm certain, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. Just one thing. Don't mention my name. Simply inform Mr. Harrington that Rosewood's owner is available to discuss his situation personally. After ending the call, I walked slowly to my closet and removed the garment bag I had placed there nearly a year earlier, a mother-of-the-bride dress I had purchased in a moment of optimistic anticipation, its soft blue silk chosen to complement Madeline's eyes. I had planned to show it to her when the right moment arose, to share in the excitement of preparation as we had once shared in so many aspects of our lives. Now it would serve a different purpose. Tomorrow, my daughter would discover exactly who owned the venue of her dreams. Tomorrow, we would both learn whether anything remained of the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. Tomorrow would change everything. I barely slept that night, memories flooding back as I prepared to face my daughter and her fiancé. The acquisition of Rosewood Manor had been my greatest professional triumph, yet one I had never shared with Madeline. The irony was almost too perfect. My journey to owning Rosewood began at the lowest point in my life. 8 years ago, just as Evergreen Gardens was finally thriving, I received devastating news. The property adjacent to ours, land I had been saving to purchase for an expansion, had been sold to developers planning a strip mall. This wasn't just a business setback, it was an existential threat. Who would book a serene garden wedding? With the sounds of construction, and eventually a busy parking lot just beyond our carefully cultivated hedges, I remember driving home in a daze, the rejection letter from the bank crumpled in my cup holder. They had denied my emergency loan request, stating my overextension in a luxury market made me too high risk. 20 years of perfect payments, of growing a business from nothing, dismissed in a paragraph of banking jargon. When I arrived home, I found Madeline waiting, her college acceptance letters spread across our kitchen table. Her excitement was palpable as she debated the merits of each prestigious institution. I forced a smile, pushing my own crisis aside to celebrate her accomplishments. Columbia has the better international relations program, she was saying, but Georgetown has those alumni connections that could really help with internships. She looked up, finally noticing my expression. Mom? What's wrong? I couldn't burden her with this, not today of all days. Nothing important, just business complications. I kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. Tell me more about these scholarships. Later that night, after Madeline had gone to bed, I sat alone on our back porch, calculating and recalculating figures that refused to add up to salvation. The security light from our neighbor's yard cast long shadows across the lawn as I confronted the possibility that everything I had built might crumble. Vivian? The voice startled me from my thoughts. Judge Henry Blackwood, our elderly neighbor, stood at the edge of our properties. In his hand was a leash attached to his ancient beagle. Bit late for you to be out here in the dark. I hastily wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. Just enjoying the night air, Judge. He made a sound of disbelief, crossing onto my property with the slow, deliberate gait of a man approaching 90. Rebecca used to say that too, when she was working through something difficult. His late wife had been my first real friend in Oakridge County, welcoming me when most others viewed the young single mother with suspicion. Perhaps it was the mention of Rebecca, or simply the accumulation of stress. But suddenly I was telling him everything. The developer's plans, the bank's rejection, my fear for Evergreen's future. He listened silently, settling into the chair beside mine while his dog dozed at our feet. When I finished, he nodded once, decisively. Come see me tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring your financial records for the past 5 years. Judge, I appreciate the thought, but 9 o'clock, Vivian, he repeated firmly. I may have a solution. I arrived at his grand Victorian house at precisely 9, a folder of documents tucked under my arm. The judge led me into his study, a magnificent room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive oak desk that had witnessed decades of legal deliberations before his retirement. The development company that purchased your neighboring property, he began without preamble, is a subsidiary of Hargrove Industries. He pronounced the name with thinly veiled contempt. Charles Hargrove and I have a complicated history. I knew of Charles Hargrove, of course, a real estate mogul with holdings throughout the state. His reputation for aggressive development was matched only by his political ambitions. What kind of history? The judge smiled thinly. Let's just say he's eager to avoid certain legal complications. I could create for him if properly motivated. He held up a hand as I began to protest. Nothing unethical, I assure you. Simply leverage from past interactions. He leaned forward, hands folded on his desk. But that's not why I asked you here. Your financial records show remarkable growth and strategic reinvestment. You've built something substantial, Vivian, from nothing but determination and intelligence. And yet, the bank rejected me, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Banks lack imagination. He dismissed the entire financial industry with a wave of his hand. But I don't. What would you say to a different kind of partnership? By the time I left the judge's study 3 hours later, my world had transformed. Judge Blackwood was offering to become a silent investor in my business, providing immediate capital to purchase the threatened property at above market value, an offer the developers would find difficult to refuse. In return, he would hold a minority stake in a newly formed company that would own both Evergreen Gardens and any future acquisitions. Why would you do this? I asked, overwhelmed by his generosity. He looked momentarily toward a photograph on his desk, Rebecca in her youth, radiant beside him at their wedding. Rebecca always believed in you, said you had the same fire she had. His eyes, still sharp despite his years, met mine directly. Besides, I have more money than I can spend in what remains of my life, and my children have already received their inheritance. Let me invest in something meaningful before I join Rebecca. That partnership changed everything. With the judge's backing, I not only secured the adjacent property, but also began looking for strategic acquisitions throughout the county. Meadowlark Pavilion, a struggling waterfront venue, became our first purchase outside Evergreen. We renovated it completely, transforming it from a dated banquet hall into a destination for couples seeking water views and modern amenities. The judge proved to be more than a financial partner. His legal acumen and connections opened doors I hadn't known existed. When zoning issues threatened to derail our expansion of Evergreen's parking facilities, a single phone call from him resolved the matter. When vendors attempted to increase prices without justification, his polite inquiries about potential restraint of trade issues quickly restored reason to negotiations. Through it all, I maintained operational control, while the judge limited his involvement to strategic advice and the occasional lunch meeting. This is your vision, Vivian, he insisted. I'm just privileged to help bring it to fruition. Madeline left for college during this period of expansion, and my communication about business developments became increasingly abbreviated in our phone conversations. She seemed more interested in her courses, her new friends, and the cultural opportunities of campus life. All things I encouraged, wanting her to embrace experiences I had never had. Our most significant acquisition came 2 years into our partnership. Rosewood Manor, with its centuries-old oak trees and meticulously preserved historic mansion, represented the pinnacle of wedding venues in our region. For generations, it had been owned by the Wellington family, descendants of the original builder who had maintained the property through economic downturns and changing fashion with aristocratic determination. When rumors began circulating that Theodore Wellington IV was considering offers for the property due to health concerns, I dismissed them as gossip. Rosewood was an institution, as permanent in our county's landscape as the mountains themselves. Then the judge called one morning, his voice uncharacteristically urgent. "The rumors are true. Wellington is selling, but quietly. No public listing. He's entertaining private offers this week only." My heart raced at the possibility. "Can we afford it? The property must be worth millions." "It is," the judge confirmed, "which is why we'll need additional investors. I've already spoken with 3 individuals who might be interested in joining us as minority partners." I hesitated, concerned about diluting control. Would we still maintain operational authority? "I've structured the proposal to ensure it. You would manage Rosewood with the same autonomy you have with our other properties. The investors would be silent partners, interested only in quarterly returns." The acquisition process unfolded with dizzying speed. I met with Theodore Wellington, exactly once, in the mahogany-paneled library of Rosewood itself. He was older than I had expected, fragile in a way that spoke of serious illness rather than mere advanced age. "Mrs. Parker," he greeted me, his aristocratic accent a relic of boarding schools and European holidays. "Judge Blackwood speaks highly of you, says you understand the importance of heritage." I chose my words carefully. "Rosewood isn't just a property, Mr. Wellington. It's a living piece of history. My intention would be to preserve its character while ensuring its continued viability." He studied me with pale blue eyes that had witnessed nearly 9 decades of human behavior. "And what of modern trends? Neon signs and photo booths? DJs playing music that could generously be called noise?" I smiled, understanding his concerns. "There's room in this county for venues that cater to contemporary tastes. Rosewood serves a different purpose. Its value lies in authenticity, in the preservation of tradition. That's what our clients would be paying for. A connection to something. Timeless." Something in my answer seemed to satisfy him. He nodded almost imperceptibly before changing the subject to financial terms. 3 weeks later, Rosewood Manor officially joined our portfolio, though the transaction remained private. We created a separate holding company, Blackwood Heritage Properties, to manage this particular asset, with the judge serving as the public face of ownership while I handled day-to-day operations. This arrangement satisfied our additional investors, who preferred anonymity, and allowed us to maintain the perception of continuity in Rosewood's prestigious reputation. The day we closed on the property, the judge and I walked the grounds together, past formal gardens where generations of brides had posed for photographs, through reception rooms where political alliances and business mergers had been celebrated alongside marriages. "You know," the judge said as we paused beneath a 200-year-old magnolia tree, "I attended my first wedding here in 1945. My cousin Margaret marrying a boy who'd just returned from the Pacific. The Wellington family sent every serviceman home with a flask of their private reserve bourbon." He smiled at the memory. "Different times. We'll honor that history," I promised. "Make sure this place remains special." He nodded, then turned to face me directly. "You've exceeded every expectation, Vivian. Rebecca would be proud of what you've accomplished." His eyes, slightly rheumy with age but still penetrating, held mine. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of business expansion, I had given little thought to personal happiness. "I'm fulfilled," I answered carefully. "Satisfied with what we've built." "That's not the same thing," he observed mildly. "All this," he gestured to encompass Rosewood's splendor, "means little if you have no one to share it with." I thought immediately of Madeline, now in her junior year at Georgetown. "My daughter is building her own life, as she should," he interjected gently. "I meant someone for you, Vivian. Companionship. Love, perhaps." I laughed, the sound echoing slightly against the ancient trees. "I'm married to my work, Judge. Always have been." "As was I for too many years," he replied with unexpected seriousness. Until Rebecca helped me understand that work, no matter how meaningful, makes for a cold bedfellow in one's final hours. He patted my hand with his gnarled one. Just something to consider. That conversation lingered with me as I immersed myself in Rosewood's operations. Under my direction, we updated mechanical systems and renovated guest accommodations, while meticulously preserving the historical features that gave the property its character. We raised prices significantly, a necessity given our investment, but ensured that every detail justified the premium. Within a year, Rosewood's booking calendar was filled 2 years in advance, with couples willingly joining waiting lists for cancellations. I took particular pride in maintaining the property's reputation for exclusivity, while introducing subtle enhancements that modern couples expected. We never announced my connection to the property. The arrangement with Blackwood Heritage Properties provided a useful buffer that kept my operational role largely invisible to the public. During this period of professional triumph, my relationship with Madeline continued its gradual transformation. Her semester abroad in Geneva segued into a summer internship at the United Nations, followed by acceptance to a prestigious graduate program. Her visits home became annual events rather than regular occurrences, and when she did return, she seemed to view Oakridge County through the lens of someone who had outgrown its limitations. "You could sell Evergreen now," she suggested during one brief Christmas visit, while helping me prepare dinner. "It's worth 10 times what you paid. And you're working too hard. You should travel, see the world a little." I paused in chopping vegetables. "I love what I do, Madeline. Building this business has been my life's work," she sighed, the sound containing a hint of pity that stung more than outright criticism would have. "That's exactly my point, Mom. It's been your whole life. Don't you want more?" the judge had asked, essentially the same question. But coming from my daughter, it carried a different implication, that I had somehow failed to evolve beyond my circumstances, that my dedication represented limitation rather than choice. "My business makes me happy," I said firmly, returning to my chopping. "It's allowed me to provide for us, to send you to excellent schools, to create security neither of us had growing up." She touched my arm lightly. "And I'm grateful, truly. I just think you deserve a bigger life than Oakridge County can offer." I didn't tell her about Rosewood then. Perhaps pride kept me silent, or the growing fear that no achievement of mine would ever quite measure up to the world she now inhabited. Or perhaps I was simply waiting for her to ask, to show genuine interest in my work rather than dismissing. It is a phase to be outgrown. That opportunity never came. Our conversations grew increasingly superficial, focusing on safe topics like weather and mutual acquaintances, while avoiding any subject that might reveal the widening gap between our perspectives. When she met Blake Harrington during her final semester of graduate school, the distance between us expanded exponentially. Blake came from exactly the world Madeline had come to admire: old money, political connections, and the casual confidence of someone who has never questioned his place in the social hierarchy. I tried to like him during his infrequent visits, to see what made my brilliant daughter so eager for his approval, but found only practiced charm covering a profound sense of entitlement. And now, preparing to meet them at Rosewood Manor to discuss their wedding, I faced the culmination of years of unspoken tensions and diverging paths. What would Madeline say when she discovered the truth? Would she feel pride in my accomplishment, or merely embarrassment that her mother, whom she had described as limited in outlook, owned the very symbol of prestige she so desperately coveted? As dawn broke on the day of our meeting, I opened my closet and removed not the mother of the bride dress I had originally planned to wear, but a tailored designer suit purchased for negotiating with potential investors. Today, I would not present myself as Madeline's mother, the woman she had deemed too embarrassing to include in her wedding. Instead, I would appear as what I had become without her knowledge, a successful businesswoman whose approval she now unwittingly sought. Judge Blackwood called as I was preparing to leave. At 92, his health had begun a sharp decline, limiting his involvement in our business to occasional phone consultations. "Today's the day," he said without preamble, his voice weaker than I remembered but still sharp with intelligence. "It is," I confirmed, adjusting my earrings while cradling the phone against my shoulder. "Remember what matters, Vivian," he advised gently. "Pride is poor compensation for love lost." I paused, his words striking deeper than I had expected. "She excluded me, Judge, lied to family about it, made it clear I'm an embarrassment." "Yes," he acknowledged, "and you're entitled to your hurt. But ask yourself what you want from today. Vindication or reconciliation?" He coughed, a sound that reminded me painfully of his fragility. "Just be certain you understand the difference before you walk into that meeting." As I drove the familiar route to Rosewood Manor, his question echoed in my mind. What did I want? From this confrontation? The satisfaction of seeing Madeline's shock? The petty triumph of denying her the venue she coveted? Or something more fundamental, a chance to rebuild the connection that had once been the center of my world? I had no answer as I parked beneath the ancient magnolias that lined Rosewood's circular drive. For the first time in years, I entered the property not through the staff entrance but through the grand front doors, presenting myself as what I truly was. The owner, arriving to determine whether my only daughter's wedding would take place. Within these historic walls, the majestic grandfather clock in Rosewood's grand foyer struck 2 as I settled into the private meeting room. A former library whose floor-to-ceiling bookshelves now held leather-bound photo albums documenting generations of weddings. The estate manager, Catherine, had arranged tea service on the antique mahogany table, Royal Doulton china I had personally selected during the renovation, alongside fresh-baked shortbread from our pastry chef. "They've arrived, Miss Parker," Catherine announced from the doorway, her perfect posture betraying her training at Europe's finest hospitality schools. I had recruited her from a renowned hotel in London, part of my strategy to elevate Rosewood's already impeccable service. "Shall I show them in directly, or would you prefer a moment?" "Directly, please," I replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my skirt. "And Catherine? Please refer to me as Ms. Parker throughout this meeting, not as the owner. I'll make any necessary explanations myself." She nodded, her professional mask revealing nothing of her curiosity. "Of course," I positioned, myself near the tall windows overlooking Rosewood's famous rose garden, deliberately creating a tableau of power. The afternoon sunlight illuminated the room, catching the diamond studs at my ears, a 40th birthday gift to myself that represented financial independence I had fought to achieve. The door opened, and I heard Madeline's voice before I saw her. Absolutely stunning topiary work. I wonder if they would consider... She stopped abruptly as she entered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Behind her, Blake appeared equally confused, his hand possessively at the small of her back. "Mrs. Parker? There must be some mistake. We have an appointment with the owner of Rosewood Manor." I allowed a moment of silence, letting the implications settle between us before responding. "No mistake, Blake. I am the appointment." Madeline's perfectly groomed eyebrows drew together. "I don't understand. Why would they have us meet with you about booking the venue?" I gestured toward the seating arrangement. "Please sit. Tea?" They moved hesitantly to the chairs opposite mine, exchanging glances that combined confusion with growing suspicion. Blake recovered first, slipping into the smooth confidence that likely served him well in boardrooms. "While it's lovely to see you, Mrs. Parker, we're on quite a tight schedule. Perhaps the actual owner is running late." "The owner is precisely on time," I replied, meeting his gaze directly as I poured tea with practiced elegance. "Blackwood Heritage Properties is the holding company that owns Rosewood Manor. I am the managing partner of that company, with controlling interest." I handed Madeline a cup, noting how her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it. "In simpler terms, I own this venue you're so eager to book for your wedding. the wedding to which I wasn't invited. The cup in Madeline's hand stilled, halfway to her lips. Blake's expression cycled rapidly through shock, disbelief, and calculation. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant calls of gardeners tending the grounds. "That's impossible," Madeline finally whispered. "You run Evergreen Gardens. It's a lovely venue, but it's not Rosewood." "I own both," I said simply, "along with Meadowlark Pavilion and Willow Creek Estate. They operate under different management structures for business reasons, but they're all part of my company's portfolio." Blake set his untouched teacup down with deliberate care. "I apologize, but I find this difficult to believe. Rosewood Manor has been a prestigious institution for generations. The Wellington family sold to Blackwood Heritage Properties 3 years ago," I interjected calmly. "Theodore Wellington's health was failing, and his children preferred liquid assets to the responsibility of maintaining a historic property. Judge Henry Blackwood, perhaps you've heard of him, partnered with me on the acquisition." Recognition flickered in Blake's eyes. The judge's reputation extended well beyond Oakridge County, his distinguished legal career and family connections making him a figure even the Harringtons would acknowledge. "Judge Blackwood is your business partner?" "Has been for 8 years," I confirmed, "though his health limits his active involvement now." Madeline had gone very still, her complexion pale beneath her perfect makeup. I could almost see her recalibrating everything she thought she knew about her mother, about the life and business she had dismissed as limited. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tremor I hadn't heard since she was a child awakening from nightmares. "Why didn't you tell me?" Such a simple question, yet laden with years of unspoken distance between us. I considered deflection, considered matching her casual dismissal of our relationship with equal indifference. Instead, something in her vulnerability prompted honesty. "When would I have told you, Madeline? During our brief holiday visits where you spent more time on your phone than in conversation with me. Or perhaps during our increasingly infrequent calls, where you spoke about your exciting new world while showing polite disinterest in mine." I softened my tone, tempering truth with gentleness. "You stopped asking about my work years ago. Eventually, I stopped offering information that wasn't welcomed." Color flooded her cheeks. "That's not fair. I've been busy building my career, establishing myself." "As have I," I replied simply. "The difference is that I remained interested in your journey while you dismissed mine." Blake cleared his throat, his expression suggesting he was recalculating his approach to this unexpected situation. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding invitations. We've been under tremendous pressure with the planning and various family expectations." I raised a hand to stop his practiced damage control. "Let's not compound the situation with convenient fictions, Blake. I overheard Madeline explicitly telling you it would be mortifying to have me at your wedding. I received calls from family members who were told I preferred a separate celebration. These weren't oversights. They were deliberate choices." Madeline flinched as though I'd struck her. "You heard that? At Sunday dinner?" I did. I met her. Gaze directly. I heard my only daughter, whom I raised alone, worked 3 jobs to put through private school, and supported through every life challenge, describe me as an embarrassment to be managed, rather than a mother to be honored. Tears welled in her eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean..." It wasn't what?" I pressed, years of accumulated hurt finally finding voice. "Wasn't intended for me to hear? Wasn't a reflection of how you truly see me? Which part wasn't real? Madeline?" Blake shifted uncomfortably before adopting a conciliatory tone that stopped just short of condescension. "Mrs. Parker, clearly emotions are running high. Perhaps we should reschedule this discussion when everyone has had time to reflect." I turned my attention to him, noting the practiced charm that failed to reach his eyes. "That won't be necessary. This isn't a negotiation, it's a revelation. You came seeking special consideration for your wedding at my venue. I'm simply ensuring you understand exactly whom you're asking for favors. And do we have any hope of securing the date? He asked, his priority transparently unchanged, despite the emotional undercurrents. Before I could respond, Madeline placed her hand on his arm. Blake, please, this isn't about the venue right now. He withdrew slightly, his expression suggesting he disagreed, but was willing to temporarily accommodate her perspective for strategic purposes. This small interaction revealed volumes about their relationship dynamic, confirming suspicions I had harbored since their engagement announcement. Turning back to me, Madeline wiped discreetly at her tears, careful not to smudge her expensive makeup. I don't know what to say. I'm shocked, obviously, and confused, and yes, hurt that you kept something this significant from me. Hurt? I repeated, unable to entirely mask my disbelief. You're hurt by my privacy while planning a wedding that deliberately excluded me? She had the grace to look ashamed, glancing down at her manicured hands. It wasn't that simple, Mom. Then explain it to me, I said, leaning forward slightly. Help me understand what could possibly justify excluding your only parent from your wedding day. Madeline looked toward Blake as if seeking permission or perhaps support, but his attention had shifted to his phone, where he was discreetly checking messages while we navigated our emotional minefield. This small dismissal seemed to strengthen something in her. She straightened her shoulders and addressed me directly. When I met Blake's family, I was intimidated, she admitted quietly. Ambassador and Mrs. Harrington have connections everywhere. Politics, finance, international diplomacy. Their world operates by different rules than what I grew up understanding. I wanted to belong without constantly explaining my background. And I was an inconvenient part of that background, I observed. She flinched but continued. Initially, I just simplified things, said my mother ran a successful event planning business. It wasn't a lie, just an understatement. But then Mrs. Harrington began taking over the wedding planning, insisting on Rosewood because 2 of Blake's cousins had married here, making it practically a family tradition. Blake finally looked up from his phone. Mother does have very specific ideas about maintaining certain standards, he offered, as though this explained everything. She arranged meetings with the wedding planner, the florist, the caterer, all without including me in the initial consultations, Madeline continued. When I finally saw the guest list, it included 3 senators, a Supreme Court justice, and diplomats from 6 countries. The wedding was becoming less about Blake and me, and more about the Harrington family's social obligations. And somewhere in that process, you decided I didn't fit the image, I concluded. That your mother, in her sensible shoes, would embarrass you among these illustrious guests. Tears spilled onto her cheeks, ruining the makeup she had so carefully preserved moments earlier. I was weak and foolish, trying so hard to be accepted that I betrayed the person who always accepted me unconditionally. Her voice broke on the final words. I'm so sorry, Mom. The apology, unexpected and seemingly genuine, pierced the armor of hurt I had constructed around my heart. I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her as I had when she was small and frightened. But decades of maternal instinct battled with the very real pain of her rejection, leaving me momentarily frozen between impulses. Blake broke the impasse, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional display unfolding before him. This is all very moving, but we do have a rather pressing practical concern. The wedding is scheduled for 12 weeks from now. Invitations have been sent, and we're without a confirmed venue. He directed his most charming smile toward me. Perhaps we could set aside these family complexities and discuss business. His ability to reduce betrayal and reconciliation to complexities that inconvenienced his wedding plans confirmed every reservation I had about him. I studied him carefully, recognizing in his polished facade the same dismissive entitlement I had encountered in Richard, Madeline's father, decades earlier. The venue is available, I said finally. Whether you'll be permitted to book it depends entirely on what happens in the next few minutes. His expression brightened with premature triumph. Excellent. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. Mother would be happy to— I'm not interested in what your mother would be happy with, I interrupted, my tone causing him to blink in surprise. My conditions have nothing to do with pricing or package upgrades. Madeline looked up, wiping tears, with the back of her hand in a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. What conditions, Mom? I set my teacup down with deliberate care, centering myself before continuing. I have 2 requirements. First, I need to understand whether you genuinely want me at your wedding as your mother, not just as a convenient solution to your venue problem. She reached across the table impulsively, grasping my hand. Of course I want you there. I was wrong, so terribly wrong, to ever suggest otherwise. I searched her face, looking beyond the perfect makeup and sophisticated styling to the daughter I had raised. Despite everything, I still knew her expressions, could still read the authenticity in her eyes. What I saw reassured me, though caution tempered my response. And my second condition, I continued, gently disengaging my hand from hers, is that you explain to Blake's parents exactly who I am. Not just Rosewood's owner, but a self-made businesswoman who built an enterprise from nothing while raising you alone. No convenient fictions, no strategic omissions. Blake shifted uncomfortably. That might be somewhat awkward given certain representations that have already been made. Exactly. The point, I replied evenly. Awkwardness now prevents living a lie indefinitely. Madeline nodded slowly, resolution replacing distress in her expression. We'll tell them everything, tonight, at dinner. I should have been proud of you and your accomplishments from the beginning. She turned to Blake. My mother built something exceptional through intelligence and determination. That's not something to hide. It's something to celebrate. He hesitated, clearly weighing social complexities against the practical necessity of securing Rosewood. Eventually, practicality won. Of course, darling. We'll explain everything to Mother and Father this evening. I nodded, accepting their commitment while remaining realistic about the challenges ahead. Then Rosewood is available for your date. Catherine will adjust the calendar and provide the standard contract for your review. Relief flooded Madeline's face. Thank you, Mom. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so grateful for it. I haven't fully forgiven yet, I clarified gently. That will take time and demonstrated change. But I'm willing to start the process. Blake stood, clearly eager to conclude this emotional conversation and secure the practical victory of booking Rosewood. Wonderful! We'll have our planner contact your staff about logistics, and of course we'll expect your input on certain elements of the celebration, Mrs. Parker. His condescension, however unintentional, crystallized something important for me. Actually, Blake, I'll be involved as Madeline's mother, not as a vendor providing a service. And you should know that my daughter spent 15 years working alongside me at Evergreen Gardens. She has more event planning expertise than most professionals in the industry. Surprise flickered across his features, suggesting yet another aspect of Madeline's background she had minimized or omitted in their relationship. I had no idea. No, I agreed. I suspect there's quite a bit about Madeline you don't yet know. Something in my tone must have communicated the challenge inherent in my observation. His expression cooled slightly as he recognized that securing the venue didn't equate to managing me. Madeline stood, her composure partially restored, though her earlier perfect appearance remained tear-stained. Mom, could we talk privately for a few minutes? Blake, would you mind waiting in the garden? He hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave us alone, before nodding with practiced graciousness. Of course. Take all the time you need. The door closed, behind him with a soft click that somehow emphasized the sudden intimacy of the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken truths and gradually diverging paths. Then Madeline did something that caught me completely off guard. She kicked off her designer heels and sank cross-legged onto the priceless antique carpet, assuming the same position she had favored for serious conversations throughout her childhood. "Really messed up, didn't I?" she said simply, looking up at me with vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. Despite everything, I found myself smiling at the familiar gesture. Moving from my chair, I joined her on the carpet, my designer suit protesting. "The unconventional seating arrangement." "You did," I agreed. "The question is, what happens now?" She regarded me thoughtfully, as though truly seeing me for the first time in years. "Now," she said with quiet determination, "we start rebuilding what I nearly destroyed. If you'll give me that chance." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through Rosewood's historic windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between us like visible manifestations of our suspended history, I recognized the moment for what it was, not an ending or a simple reconciliation, but the beginning of a new, more complex chapter in our relationship. "I'll give you that chance," I finally responded. "But this time, we build on a foundation of truth, about who you are, who I am, and what we mean to each other." Her smile, tremulous but genuine, reminded me of the little girl who had once believed I could fix anything broken in her world. I'd like that more than anything. Outside, Blake waited in Rosewood's manicured garden, unaware that the conversation unfolding in his absence would reshape not only his wedding plans, but the future of his relationship with my daughter. As for what that future held, whether Madeline would continue toward marriage with this man who so clearly underestimated her, or whether today's revelations would prompt deeper reconsiderations, that remained a question yet to be answered. The evening after our confrontation at Rosewood, I received an unexpected text from Madeline. "Dinner with the Harringtons in 30 minutes. Terrified but determined. Will call afterward." I stared at my phone, both proud of her courage and anxious about the fallout. Ambassador Harrington and his wife had spent months planning a wedding that showcased their family's social position, rather than celebrating their son's relationship. Learning that their carefully cultivated narrative about Madeline's background was false would undoubtedly create tension. I distracted myself by visiting Judge Blackwood, bringing him a thermos of the spiced tea he favored and a detailed account of the day's confrontation. His health had declined significantly in recent weeks, his once commanding presence now diminished as he sat wrapped in blankets despite the warm spring evening. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked after relating the events at Rosewood. Part of me still wants to protect her, even after everything. The judge considered my question with the deliberation that had made him legendary in legal circles. "You gave her the opportunity to choose integrity over convenience," he said finally. "That's not punishment, it's respect. You're treating her as the adult you raised her to be, not the child you wish you could protect." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his perspective. "Blake concerns me. He seemed more interested in securing the venue than addressing the breach between Madeline and me. Men like Blake are transactional by nature," the judge observed. "They evaluate relationships based on utility rather than emotional connection." He paused, his breath catching briefly before he continued. "The question is whether Madeline recognizes this dynamic." "I don't know," I admitted. 20 years ago, I would have said she was too perceptive to be manipulated. But now, the judge reached for my hand, his skin parchment thin over prominent veins. "Have faith in your daughter, Vivian. The values you instilled don't disappear. Sometimes they just go dormant until circumstances awaken them." I left his house shortly after 9, extracting a promise that he would consult his doctor about the increasing shortness of breath that punctuated our conversation. Driving home through the quiet streets of Oakridge County, I found myself reflecting on his words about dormant values. Had I truly given Madeline a foundation strong enough to withstand the seductive pull of status and superficial acceptance? Phone rang just as I pulled into my driveway. Madeline's name illuminated the screen. I answered immediately, hearing restaurant noise in the background. "How did it go?" I asked without preamble. "Can I come over?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm leaving the restaurant now." 20 minutes later, she arrived at my door still wearing the elegant black dress and pearls she'd clearly chosen for impressing her future in-laws. But her carefully arranged hair had come partially undone, and her expression held none of the poised confidence she typically projected. "That bad?" I asked, stepping aside to let her enter. She moved past me into the living room, kicking off her heels in a gesture, reminiscent of our earlier moment at Rosewood. "Worse," she replied, sinking onto the sofa. "Much worse." I settled beside her, noting the slight tremor in her hands. "Tell me." "I did exactly what I promised," she began. "Explained that you weren't just a small business owner but a successful entrepreneur who had built a significant hospitality portfolio including Rosewood Manor." She twisted the cocktail ring on her right hand, a nervous habit from childhood. At first, they didn't believe me. Mrs. Harrington actually laughed and said I must be confused about ownership structures. "That sounds uncomfortable," I observed, imagining the patronizing tone such a comment would carry. "Blake backed me up, confirming you controlled Rosewood through some holding company. That's when things really deteriorated." She reached for the throw pillow beside her, hugging it to her chest like armor. Ambassador Harrington started interrogating me about why I hadn't disclosed this information earlier. As if I was being interviewed for a position rather than marrying their son, I maintained a neutral expression despite my internal alarm at this description. "What did you tell them?" Truth," she said, meeting my eyes directly, "that I had allowed myself to be intimidated by their status and had minimized my background to fit what I thought they wanted. That I'd been wrong to be ashamed of where I came from, and especially wrong to exclude you from the wedding." Pride swelled in my chest at her courage. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," she confirmed, wiping away a tear that escaped despite her obvious effort at control. "Mrs. Harrington said, and I'm quoting exactly, 'Well, this is rather awkward. We've already told everyone your mother was a retired academic who's traveling in Europe during the wedding." My eyebrows rose involuntarily. "A retired academic?" Apparently, running a catering hall wasn't prestigious enough for their narrative. Her voice held a bitter edge I'd never heard before. When I pushed back, explaining that you'd built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing while raising me alone, Mrs. Harrington suggested we table this uncomfortable discussion and focus on whether you would honor their existing plans for Rosewood. "Their plans for my property," I clarified, indignation rising. "Exactly." Madeline shook her head in apparent disbelief at the memory. That's when I realized something fundamental had shifted for me. Suddenly, I could see them clearly, not as intimidating paragons of social perfection, but as entitled people who believed their status exempted them from basic human decency. She stood abruptly, pacing the room with nervous energy. Ambassador Harrington suggested that since this revelation complicated matters, perhaps we should postpone the wedding until appropriate arrangements could be made. Blake immediately objected, not because he was defending me, but because postponement would interfere with their family's summer travel schedule. "And how did you respond?" I asked carefully, sensing we were approaching the crux of the evening's events. Madeline paused by the mantel, examining the framed photograph of us at her high school graduation, her arm slung casually around my shoulders, in unself-conscious affection. "I said I agreed we should postpone," she replied quietly, "indefinitely." My breath caught. "You called off the wedding?" She turned to face me, vulnerability and determination mingling in her expression. I realized I was about to enter a family that would never truly accept me for who I am, only for who they could shape me to become. And worse, I was becoming someone who would betray her own mother to gain their approval. Her voice broke slightly. What kind of foundation is that for a marriage? I crossed the room and embraced her for the first time in years. Not the polite, brief hug of recent holiday visits, but the encompassing embrace of her childhood, when my arms represented absolute safety. She clung to me, her composed facade crumbling as she sobbed against my shoulder. "Did I make a mistake?" she whispered when the tears finally subsided. "Throwing away a future most people would envy?" I pulled back slightly, framing her face with my hands as I had when she was small and needed my full attention. "Only you can answer that. But I will say this. Envy is a poor substitute for happiness, and appearance is a hollow replacement for authentic connection." She nodded, managing a watery smile. "When did you get so wise, Mom?" "Around the time I realized I might lose my only daughter to a world that would never value the qualities that make her truly exceptional," I replied honestly. The following weeks unfolded with surprising developments. Madeline moved temporarily into my guest room while she assessed her next steps, professionally and personally. Blake called repeatedly during the first few days, his messages gradually shifting from persuasive to accusatory as he realized her decision might be final. Ambassador and Mrs. Harrington made one attempt at intervention, arriving unannounced at my door with thinly veiled suggestions about the unfortunate business implications of interfering with their son's relationship. "I understand completely," I replied to their implied threat. "You believe your social connections could impact my business interests." I smiled pleasantly while showing them out. "You might want to research Judge Blackwood's network before pursuing that approach. He's quite protective of our shared investments." They did not return, and the wedding cancellation became official the following day. Madeline handled the practical aftermath with surprising resilience, personally calling guests to explain the change of plans while deflecting the inevitable questions with gracious vagueness. "Aren't you devastated?" Eleanor asked when she visited, clearly expecting to find. Madeline collapsed in grief. "You've canceled a wedding most girls dream about." Madeline considered the question thoughtfully. "I'm mourning the relationship I thought I had, rather than the one that actually existed," she replied. "But mostly I feel unburdened, like I can breathe fully for the first time in years." This newfound clarity extended beyond her personal life. One morning over breakfast, she casually mentioned an idea that had apparently been percolating in her international relations background. "What would you think about establishing a foundation that helps women in developing countries create event-centered businesses?" she asked, spreading jam on her toast with studied nonchalance. "Using your business model as a template, but adapted for different cultural and economic contexts?" I looked up from my coffee in surprise. "That's a remarkably specific vision." "I've been thinking about it for a while," she admitted. "Even when I was pretending your work wasn't impressive enough for the Harrington Circle, some part of me recognized its transformative potential. You created financial independence and community impact simultaneously. That's a powerful model for women with limited options." "It would require significant startup funding," I observed, mind already calculating possibilities. "And expertise in international development that neither of us currently possesses." She nodded, pulling out her tablet to reveal detailed notes. That suggested this was far more than a passing idea. "I've already researched potential collaborators and grant opportunities, and I thought perhaps Blackwood Heritage Properties might consider this a worthy extension of its existing community engagement." I studied my daughter across the breakfast table, recognizing in her methodical approach and natural business instinct reflections of qualities I had nurtured in her youth. The judge would certainly find this interesting, as would I. Thus began an unexpected new chapter in our relationship, not a return to our previous dynamic, but the emergence of something more complex and equal. Madeline brought her international contacts, strategic thinking, and academic framework to the foundation concept, while I contributed practical business knowledge and funding connections. We spent hours at my dining room table developing the initiative, our conversations weaving between professional planning and personal reconnection. During this period, Judge Blackwood's health deteriorated rapidly. When he was hospitalized with pneumonia, Madeline and I took turns sitting with him, ensuring he was never alone during waking hours. She read legal journals aloud when his vision became too weak for independent reading, while I handled urgent business matters from a chair beside his bed. "You two have reconciled," he observed during one rare moment when his mind seemed fully clear. "I'm glad to have witnessed that before I go." "You're not going anywhere," I insisted, adjusting his pillows with unnecessary precision to hide my emotion. "The foundation needs your legal expertise." He smiled weakly. "The foundation needs exactly what it already has. Two brilliant, stubborn Parker women working together." His gaze shifted to Madeline. "You found your way back to authenticity. Not everyone manages that feat after losing their path." She took his fragile hand in hers. "I had excellent guides showing me the way home." The judge passed peacefully 3 days later, with Madeline and me at his bedside. His legacy extended far beyond the financial partnership that had transformed my business. He had modeled integrity, wisdom, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes, lessons that had ultimately helped bring my daughter back to herself. The reading of his will contained one final surprise. He had designated a significant portion of his estate specifically for the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation Madeline and I were developing. "To create pathways to independence for those who remind me of a certain determined young woman I once knew," his bequest letter stated, bringing tears to my eyes as his attorney read it aloud. 6 months after the canceled wedding, we officially launched the Blackwood Parker Foundation for Women's Entrepreneurship with a celebration at Rosewood Manor. The guest list included local business leaders, international development experts, and many of the couples whose weddings at my venues had funded the empire that now supported this new initiative. Madeline stood confidently at the podium, articulating our vision without a trace of the artificial polish she had affected during her time with Blake. Instead, she projected authentic passion and practical intelligence, qualities far more compelling than manufactured sophistication. "My mother built something extraordinary from nothing," she told the assembled guests, her gaze finding mine in the audience. "She taught me that true success isn't measured by social acceptance or surface impressions, but by creating genuine value and maintaining authenticity even when it's difficult." Later that evening, as staff cleared the last of the celebration decorations, Madeline and I walked the grounds of Rosewood together. The spring air carried the scent of blooming magnolias, the same trees that had witnessed my conversation with the judge years earlier when he had gently suggested that success without connection made for a cold bedfellow in one's final hours. "Do you remember when I was little, and you used to let me help with wedding preparations at Evergreen?" Madeline asked as we paused beneath those magnificent trees. "I would fold napkins into swans and arrange rose petals in little baskets." I smiled at the memory. "You were remarkably precise for a 7-year-old. The staff used to marvel at your attention to detail. I felt so important, being trusted with real responsibilities," she said softly. "But somewhere along the way, I started believing that your world, our world, wasn't impressive enough, that I needed to leave it behind to become someone who mattered." "And now?" I prompted gently. She gazed up at Rosewood Manor, its windows illuminated against the gathering dusk, the historic building standing as testament to preservation of what matters while adapting to changing times. "Now I understand that what you built wasn't just businesses or properties," she replied. "It was a legacy of values, determination, integrity, authentic connection. That's what I almost lost, and what I'm profoundly grateful to have rediscovered." Squeezed her hand, recognizing in this moment not an ending, but a continuation. The natural evolution of a mother-daughter relationship that had weathered betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically connected than before. "Welcome home," I said simply. The path that had led us here contained pain and missteps, profound hurt and difficult reconciliation. but standing together beneath Rosewood's ancient trees, I felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought my daughter back to herself and back to me, not as the child I had raised, but as the woman she was meant to become. 3 years have passed since that pivotal confrontation at Rosewood Manor changed the trajectory of our lives. The Blackwood Parker Foundation now operates in 7 countries, helping women transform traditional celebrations into sustainable businesses. What began as a concept sketched at my kitchen table has grown into an organization that honors Judge Blackwood's memory while creating pathways to independence for hundreds of women worldwide. Madeline thrives as the Foundation's executive director, her international relations background perfectly complementing the practical business framework I established. She travels frequently, last month to a remote village in Peru, where women are revitalizing indigenous wedding traditions as cultural tourism experiences, next week to Thailand, where a collective of mothers is building a celebration venue using sustainable architecture principles. My role has evolved as well. 2 years ago, I began the careful process of transitioning operational control of my venues to a management team comprised mostly of long-term employees. I remain chairman of the board for Blackwood Heritage Properties, but my daily focus has shifted to mentoring foundation recipients and documenting our business model for wider application. This gradual stepping back wasn't prompted by diminished passion for the business, but by unexpected developments in my personal life, specifically, my relationship with Dr. Thomas Whitfield, the physician who cared for Judge Blackwood during his final illness. Our friendship, built during those difficult hospital vigils, blossomed slowly into something neither of us anticipated at our stage of life. You realize you've contradicted everything you ever told me about romance being impractical, Madeline teased when I finally admitted the relationship had become serious. 53 is hardly the conventional age for discovering you're not married to your work, after all. Thomas and I were married in a simple ceremony at Evergreen Gardens last autumn, the venue where my journey began, decorated with late-season blooms harvested from the gardens I had planted decades earlier. Madeline served as my maid of honor, her toast touching on how life circles back to offer second chances when we remain open to possibility. Today marks another full-circle moment as I prepare Rosewood Manor for a celebration I once thought impossible, Madeline's wedding to Gabriel Ortiz, an architect specializing in historical preservation, whom she met during a foundation project in his native Colombia. Their relationship developed organically over 2 years of collaboration, friendship gradually deepening into respect and eventually love. Unlike the canceled spectacle with Blake, this wedding reflects the authentic personalities of the couple. 60 guests will witness their vows beneath Rosewood's ancient magnolias, followed by dinner featuring fusion cuisine that honors both cultural backgrounds. No society photographers, no diplomatic corps, no performance of status, just genuine celebration surrounded by people who truly know and value them. I adjust white hydrangeas in a crystal vase in Rosewood's bridal suite, pausing to appreciate how different this day feels from the scenario Madeline once pursued. Through the open door, I can hear her laughing with her bridesmaids, real friends rather than strategic social connections. Her dress hangs nearby, its elegant simplicity, a far cry from the elaborate designer creation Blake's mother had insisted upon. A knock at the doorframe draws my attention. Eleanor stands there, elegant in sage green silk, her expression thoughtful. "Remember when Madeline was excluded from that Harrington wedding?" she asks, entering the room. Catherine Harrington Mills. Happened about 9 months after Madeline. Broke things off with Blake. I nod, recalling the society page coverage of Blake's surprisingly quick remarriage to a congressman's daughter. What about it? I saw Catherine yesterday at the hospital fundraiser. She mentioned they're divorcing. Apparently, Ambassador Harrington's financial situation has become complicated. Some investigation involving offshore accounts. Eleanor arranges herself carefully on the window seat. She seemed quite bitter about discovering her father-in-law isn't as solvent as they'd all believed. The news brings no satisfaction, only a reflective recognition of how differently Madeline's life might have unfolded. Sometimes what appears to be rejection is actually protection, I observe, remembering Judge Blackwood's words about having faith in dormant values. Eleanor studies me with the frank assessment of a lifelong friend. You've changed, Vivian. There was a time when you'd have considered this vindication. Perhaps I've finally learned that vindication is less valuable than growth, I reply, turning as Madeline enters the room in her silk robe, hair already arranged, in an elegant updo adorned with tiny fresh flowers. Mom, Gabriel's grandmother just arrived. Could you— She stops, noticing our expressions. Is everything okay? Perfect, I assure her, squeezing Eleanor's shoulder as I move toward the door. Just catching up with Eleanor. I'll make sure Mrs. Ortiz is comfortable. Afterward, I find Gabriel in the groom's quarters, adjusting his tie with nervous precision. At 39, he brings to the relationship not just professional accomplishment, but emotional maturity born from his own life challenges, including raising his young daughter alone after his first wife's death. His warmth and integrity remind me somewhat of Raymond, with an added dimension of worldliness that complements Madeline perfectly. Mrs. Parker, he greets me, his Colombian accent still evident despite years of international work. Everything is beautiful. Thank you for this extraordinary gift. It's Vivian, remember? And hosting my daughter's wedding at my own venue hardly qualifies as extraordinary. I straighten his already perfect tie, a maternal gesture he accepts with good humor. I meant the gift of your blessing, he clarifies, his expression serious. Madeline has told me how deeply your relationship was damaged before, that you have rebuilt such trust and love. This is the extraordinary gift you've given her. Given us. His perception catches me off guard. The rebuilding was mutual, I reply after a moment. We both had to change. He nods, understanding in his eyes. The strongest structures are those that have been tested, reinforced, and rebuilt with greater wisdom, no? This is what makes historical buildings worth preserving, not their perfection, but their resilience. The wisdom in his observation stays with me as I make final preparations throughout the venue. Resilience, not the absence of damage, but the commitment to repair and strengthen, has defined not just my relationship with Madeline, but my entire life journey. As the ceremony approaches, I find a quiet moment alone in Rosewood's garden. The afternoon sun filters through ancient trees that have witnessed generations of celebrations, their endurance a testament to nature's patient resilience. Standing here, I can trace the unlikely path that led from my desperate purchase of a failing reception hall to creating a business empire, from single motherhood to unexpected late-life love, from the brink of losing my only child to forging a deeper, more authentic connection than we'd ever shared before. Mom! Madeline's voice interrupts my reflection. She stands at the garden entrance in her wedding dress, its simple elegance highlighting her natural beauty rather than transforming it into someone else's ideal. It's almost time. Would you help me with my mother's necklace? She extends her hand, revealing the pearl pendant that had belonged to my mother. The only heirloom I had to offer, modest in monetary value but rich in significance. I had given it to Madeline on her 18th birthday, and seeing it now, chosen for this important day, brings unexpected emotion. I thought you might wear the sapphires Gabriel gave you, I say as I fasten the clasp around her neck. She touches the pearls gently. Those are for the reception. For the ceremony, I wanted to carry something of our history, of the women who made me possible. Her eyes meet mine in the mirror. I am who I am because of you, Mom. The good parts, anyway, she adds with a smile, that acknowledges our journey hasn't always been smooth. I adjust the necklace, our reflection capturing a symmetry I hadn't noticed before. The same determined set of our shoulders, the same directness in our gaze. You were always extraordinary. Madeline! All I did was create the conditions for you to discover that truth for yourself. Even when I lost my way? She asks softly. Especially then, I reply, because finding your way back to authenticity after being lost is the greatest achievement of all. As we walk arm in arm toward the ceremony area, where Gabriel and their assembled loved ones wait, I reflect on how the exclusion that once wounded me so deeply ultimately created the opening for profound transformation. Had Madeline included me in her original wedding plans, had I never revealed my ownership of Rosewood, we might have continued our gradual estrangement, maintaining superficial connection while growing increasingly distant in ways that matter. Instead, that painful rejection forced a necessary confrontation with truth, about status and authenticity, about values and priorities, about the legacy we create through both our professional accomplishments and our personal relationships. The wedding that never happened made space for something far more valuable. The reconstruction of a mother-daughter bond strong enough to weather future challenges, while honoring the unique individuals we have both become. As I take my seat in the front row, watching Gabriel's face illuminate with joy as Madeline approaches, I silently thank the universe for unanswered prayers and painful rejections that redirect us toward our truest path. Sometimes exclusion becomes the doorway to something far better than inclusion would have provided. A truth I could never have imagined on that painful day when I discovered my daughter had written me out of what should have been our shared celebration. The ceremony begins, simple and heartfelt. Watching Madeline's radiant confidence as she speaks her vows, I recognize the greatest success of my life. Not the business empire I built from nothing, but raising a daughter capable of finding her way back to authentic joy after nearly losing herself in artificial expectations. Some legacies are built of brick and stone, others of wisdom and resilience passed from one generation to the next. Today, surrounded by both kinds in perfect harmony, I understand that being excluded from my daughter's first wedding wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of a far better one. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.